One of the biggest problems facing the United States today is the use of deadly force by police departments, most specifically against unarmed African American men. It's one of the most pressing issues that progressive reform movements are dealing with currently today, and is one of the most talked about movements in not only the United States but the world. According to the San Jose Mercury News, department reform is being heavily pushed for by the majority and is one of the most popular movements that's currently supported by the masses, though it does meet significant resistance nonetheless. According to the OC Register, the laws currently in place, especially in California, do allow for legal manslaughter by police departments because police departments have always had the capacity to kill if they've needed to. Most specifically, a law in the state of California allows for officers to fire at anyone retreating from a felony charge, and they can't be prosecuted if they kill the individual in question. The problems that are facing most individuals that have to deal with police departments are, according to ABC News, that the majority of officers that see individuals that are unarmed but holding other objects will always perceive it as a weapon based on their training, which is either fight or flight. So only half of shooting victims are actually armed. According to the New Yorker, police departments are allowed to essentially run themselves without federal checks or any sort of balance by the people or any sort of oversight from anybody, which means that police departments can essentially protect their backs if there's ever been an issue, and they can protect their own even if their own are in the wrong. So should an officer commit an illegal shooting, which is clearly illegal, the departments can kind of circle their wagons and continue to protect the officer and portray the incident as lawful even when it clearly wasn't. Now, some of the causes of police violence in the United States are, according to the Los Angeles Times, the big argument is necessary versus reasonable. So the majority of police-involved shootings are deemed reasonable as opposed to necessary today. So when a police-involved shooting is considered reasonable in a court of law, if there was the possibility that they had a weapon or they had any sort of warrant for their arrest, not necessarily that they did, then that shooting can be deemed reasonable and the officer can't be charged for it. The big push in the United States currently is to switch from reasonable to necessary. Necessary being that if an officer shoots an unarmed individual, then they can be prosecuted in a court of law for manslaughter or for first degree or second degree murder because the individual didn't have a weapon. The issue is that when it's considered reasonable by law on paper, then shooting an unarmed individual is not inherently illegal if the officer thought that they had probable cause to do so, and it must be switched to necessary. According to the Wall Street Journal, another big issue is race. Race is one of the most talked about and prominent issues when it comes to department-involved shootings in the United States because officers themselves have surveyed and said that they are 53% more likely to use force against an individual if they are darker skinned, especially if they're African American, and that includes deadly force. Officers have an inherent bias towards anybody that is not Caucasian, and they're immediately deemed more violent based on stereotypes and prejudices that have existed long before the individual was a police officer. Another survey that was done nationally and reported in the Wall Street Journal has shown that when surveyed, the civilian populace says that they believe, based on their skin color, they're 350% more likely to have deadly force used against them or any force used against them by police officers. And a large part of this is due to their race. And that's not just African Americans, that's anybody of any descent that isn't Caucasian and is of darker skin, including Middle Eastern and Hispanic. So some of the solutions for the issue are to hold police departments accountable is one of the big ones. According to the Tampa Bay Times, the most significant solution for these problems would be holding departments accountable, not only as wholes, but just with officers individually by those departments. Most police departments need to be held accountable for any shootings that occur, and this means not just a slap on the wrist. This means significant restrictions and punishment and watching over them. And accountability also includes oversight. So the federal government and the people need to be able to control and condemn any actions by police departments that would be considered unethical or a violation of civil liberties or law. So there needs to be accountability, and there needs to be oversight by the federal government specifically, because that's what's going to control police departments that are currently running themselves. And another thing would be to set new standards. According to the San Diego Tribune, one of the most important aspects to prevent officer-involved shootings is to train them differently. So new standards and protocols need to be set, and they need to have officers trained to respond to situations with less violence from the get-go. So there needs to be a different foundation to start with, and they can't just have officers having either fight or flight responses. There can't just be shoot or retreat. There needs to be diffusion, and they need to use other methods that are not violence to resolve conflicts with individuals and areas. They need to have a better sensitivity of racial issues and a better understanding of the geography of the area they're in. So in conclusion, one of the most pressing issues in the United States today, facing everyone, not just people that are tied to police departments, is the use of deadly force and what that means in today's society. And it's very difficult when you are of a darker skin because you're immediately prejudiced against by police departments. And this requires reform and new change and new standards to be set in order to prevent it in the future.